I don't know about you, but I'm deeply concerned about our nation right now. I'd like to share a Paul Harvey radio interview that was conducted in 1964. You'll be amazed at what he says on this video.
If I were the devil, if I were the devil, if I were the prince of darkness, I'd want to engulf the whole world in darkness, and I'd have a third of its real estate and 4/5 of its population, but I wouldn't be happy until I had seized the ripest apple on the tree, thee. So I'd set about, however necessary, to take over the United States. I'd subvert the churches first. I'd begin with a campaign of whispers. With the wisdom of a serpent, I would whisper to you as I whispered to Eve, do as you please. To the young, I would whisper that the Bible is a myth. I would convince them that man created God instead of the other way around. I would confide that what's bad is good and what's good is square. And the old I would teach to pray after me, Our Father, which art in Washington. And then I'd get organized. I'd educate authors in how to make lurid literature exciting so that anything else would appear dull and uninteresting. I'd threaten TV with dirtier movies and vice versa. I'd peddle narcotics to whom I could. I'd sell alcohol to ladies and gentlemen of distinction. I'd tranquilize the rest with pills. If I were the devil, I'd soon have families at war with themselves, churches at war with themselves, and nations at war with themselves, until each in its turn was consumed. And with promises of higher ratings, I'd have mesmerizing media fanning the flames. If I were the devil, I would encourage schools to refine young intellects, but neglect to discipline emotions. Just let those run wild. Until before you knew it, you'd have to have drug-sniffing dogs and metal detectors at every schoolhouse door. Within a decade, I'd have prisons overflowing. I'd have judges promoting pornography. Soon I could evict God from the courthouse, then from the schoolhouse, and then from the houses of Congress. And in his own churches, I would substitute psychology for religion and deify science. I would lure priests and pastors into misusing boys and girls and church money. If I were the devil, I'd make the symbol of Easter an egg and the symbol of Christmas a bottle. If I were the devil, I'd take from those who have and give to those who wanted until I had killed the incentive of the ambitious. And what'll you bet? I couldn't get whole states to promote gambling as the way to get rich. I would caution against extremes in hard work, in patriotism, in moral conduct. I would convince the young that marriage is old-fashioned, that swinging is more fun, that what you see on TV is the way to be. And thus I could undress you in public, and I could lure you into bed with diseases for which there is no cure. In other words, if I were the devil, I'd just keep right on doing what he's doing.
America is no longer the nation it once was. We are one generation from becoming a secular nation like the nations of Europe. We are the proverbial frog in the kettle. We need to understand the times we live in. In 1 Chronicles 12:32, it says, "The sons of Issachar, who had understanding of the times, to know what Israel ought to do." We need to know what the body of Christ should be doing at this time in America. The time is late. We live in a perfect storm. Just look at all of the situations we find ourselves in. The liberalization of America, anarchy, even as we watch the television right now, the COVID-19 crisis, homelessness, socialism, moral crisis, the gay issue, sanctuary cities, North Korea, a debt over $22 trillion. It just seems to go on and on. But we live in a perfect storm that could shift the nation entirely with any of these issues that escalate. America truly is in a deep crisis. History tells us that most nations last for about 222 years. We're in the final stage of what they call the late decadent stage, when nations go off the cliff and never return. No empire in the history of the world has ever recovered from this stage. One of the key attributes of that stage is transgender acceptance. It's the final stage before imminent collapse. After late decadence, societal collapse and anarchy is the norm. The democratic society and its stability is lost forever. As I said before, none have ever recovered from that place when the transgender acceptance becomes norm in society. We've been a part of an American experiment since 1775. We've reached a tipping point in 2020, and the question is whether that tipping point is going to go down or up. I want to introduce to you today a catalytic strategy for national revival. You see, back in 1975, God gave a new plan to Bill Bright and Lauren Cunningham. God spoke to each of them individually and said, if we're going to shift the culture, it's going to have to be through 7 key areas. Some call them mind molders, some call them gates, some call them mountains, based on Isaiah 2:2. What they've learned is that we can actually shift one of these cultural mountains with as little as 3 to 5% of leadership operating at the top of those cultural mountains. And so they began a strategy to implement this within their youth ministries. The 7 cultural mountains are arts and entertainment, business, family, church, education, government, and media. Now I want you to notice something about that diagram. The church is touching every mountain, and that's really the way it should be, because the message of Christ should touch every aspect and every mountain. In Isaiah 2:2 it says, now it shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow to it. You see, Jesus will be on top of every mountain at some point. I think that the family is a very foundational mountain. This is where the emotional health and well-being of people exist. And then we have media, education, arts and entertainment, where we define worldview and beliefs and values. Then government, where we adopt and interpret and enforce our laws. Business, where prosperity and economy reside. And of course the church, where God, morality, and values should be represented to the nation. Jesus said, our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Matthew 6:10. That was Jesus' prayer, that whatever is in heaven would come upon earth. That's his prayer. So if there's no corruption in heaven, he doesn't want it on earth. If there's no disease in heaven, he doesn't want it on earth. And so our mandate is to be delegated representatives of Jesus on earth, to bring salt and light on the earth, and to bring his kingdom upon the earth. In John 1:3, it says, all things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. God is over it all. There is one body and one spirit, just as you were called to one hope when you were called, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. Ephesians 4:4-6. Jesus is Lord over all domains of influence, not just Lord over salvation, but all the domains. He's the King of kings, the Lord of justice, the Jehovah Jireh, the Lord of economics, the Father, Lord of the family, Creator God, Lord of science and technology. He's the living Word, Lord of communication. He's the Potter, Lord of the arts of beauty. He's the great teacher, Lord of education. Oh, no single piece of our mental world is to be hermetically sealed off from the rest, and there is not a square inch in the whole domain of our human existence over which Christ, who is sovereign over all, does not cry, mine. Abraham Kuyper, Prime Minister from 1901 to 1905. Wouldn't it be awesome if we had some politicians that represented us in that way in government? Well, we've had some tipping points over the years that has gotten us to the place that we're in. We started out as a moral and spiritual nation and moved into becoming a secular culture and the family breakdown. It began in Deuteronomy 28, where the Bible talks about blessing and cursing. And it's a verse that clearly tells us what goes on in a nation when it obeys God and what goes on when it disobeys God. We're beginning to see many of the attributes of those characteristics in a nation that disobeys God. And then in 1857, the National Education Association came along, and that's where we began to kick God out of the schools. For 200 years, the New England Primer was used to teach our children to read and write. It was all based on the Bible because the Pilgrims came over and wanted a new country based upon the foundations of Scripture. But over time, the National Education Association has liberalized our educational system. In the 1930s, we saw that the church abandoned Hollywood, and it was this time that many directors and filmmakers were asking many of the young people in churches to come to Hollywood. But the pastors said, no, we don't want anything to do with that evil culture. As a result, we abandoned Hollywood. And then in 1953, Playboy magazine was birthed into the nation. This saw a sexual revolution come into our nation that has never returned and has only gotten worse and worse. And so when that happened, we began to see more and more promiscuity in our nation. We saw Woodstock in the 60s that ushered us into a very difficult season and yet another tipping point. And then in 1963, prayer was removed from schools. We began to see the decline of education, the decline of safety in our schools. We saw the decline of test scores, and it has never returned. And then Roe versus Wade. In 1973, we saw the abortion law changed, and we began to kill unborn babies in America. And we began to see over 61 million babies killed in America. In 1997, we saw the very first public kiss on national television. This ushered in a moral decline that further and further contributed to the debasing of society. And it began to move into all arts and entertainment and media and every aspect of culture. And then in 2000, we saw relativism introduced with our young people. That said that anything goes as long as it doesn't affect me. And so we saw a change in the ability of young people to hold a absolute worldview. And then in 2015, we saw the ultimate, where the Supreme Court changed the definition of marriage, no longer between a man and woman, but between two consenting adults. And so we've moved into a government that's civil versus moral. Over 60 million abortions. Just look at the annual death rates in America. Accidents, 120,000, cancer, 580,000, heart disease, 600,000, abortions, 1.6 million deaths annually. We're losing our Christian liberties like no time before, making conservative values hate speech. You see, the devil always twists the truth, and so we're in a culture war. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Isaiah 5:20. We've come over these decades where we've seen more and more of a moving away from the foundations that have made our nation great. One of the interesting stats that we can tell you is that culture is defined by only 3 to 5% of leadership at the top of a cultural mountain. A sociologist named Randall Collins quoted in his book, U.S. Culture has been defined by less than 500 intellectual cultural philosophers who influenced 7 gates and supporting networks since our birth as a nation. And so he is a secular sociologist, and he's talking about these 7 key areas that shape culture. You see, there's already a proven case study of this strategy that was hugely successful with less than 3% of the population. That is the gay rights movement. You see, what do you think the percent of population in our society is gay? Well, perhaps you might say 10 or 20 or maybe even 30% based on all the publicity that you hear about them. The truth is, it's only between 2.5% to 4.5% of the adult population would consider themselves gay. There were two Harvard attorneys that convened a meeting in 1987 among 175 gay activists in Virginia. And they came out of that meeting writing a book called After the Ball, How America Will Conquer Its Fear and Hatred of Gays in the 90s. Well, what's interesting in that book is what they say about themselves. Listen to this actual quote from the book. We argue that for all practical purposes, gays should be considered to have been born gay, even though sexual orientation for most humans seems to be the product of a complex interaction between innate predispositions and environmental factors during childhood and early adolescence. Well, have you ever heard that before from the media? Have you ever heard that from a gay person? They're propagating a lie. You see, they had to do that because they had to build their case around a civil case. You see, what happens if it's a choice? If it's a choice, it means that it becomes a moral issue, a lifestyle preference. And so they couldn't do that. So they had to deny the truth of their condition and have to say that they're born gay in order for them to create this to be a civil issue. And as a result, they were able to change laws and get civil rights. They even tried to piggyback off the African American civil rights movement. The entire premise has been built on a lie. We're going to remove God from this society, says most of the gay people. This 3.5% of the population is dictating to the 96.5% of people what they should believe. We're now even seeing our young people impacted by aberrant behavior. Drag queen story is now a part of elementary schools and public libraries where men dress in women's clothing, reading homosexual-themed books to children. This, according to their own website, quote, captures the imagination and play of the gender fluidity of childhood and gives kids glamorous, positive, and unabashedly queer role models. Could you ever have imagined that we would see that in America? How is it that 1 million gay activists can bully the rest of the country into their agenda? How is it that 70% of the population who do not agree with this lifestyle, those who identify as Christian, can be bullied to accept the gay lifestyle? The answer is they are organized, united, sold out to their message, and well-funded with a strategy. Christianity is not doing any of this. So how did they do it? Well, they began with arts and entertainment by writing scripts, sending their people to get trained in Hollywood. Once they realized their public parades were not having the effect they wanted, they completely changed their strategy. And they began to get movies made about gays and had people represented as a normal part of life so that you would accept that lifestyle as a normal part of life. And then they went into media. They got anchors on CNN and different places, CNBC, different places where gay people are openly gay and, share their lifestyle with you over media. And they justify their behavior, and many say, I was born this way. And then government, they began to change our laws, and they began to have lobbyists in government in order to change the laws, and such as gay marriage being accepted as law of the land, and even had the White House light up the entire White House as a rainbow, which they're stealing God's rainbow. And then education. They've been done a masterful job of going into education and changing textbooks and getting things within the educational environment about gender acceptance, and it's just incredible what they've done there. Of course, business has embraced this fully. They've had these groups within government, and they have Gay Pride Day, and businesses support those days, and you see the business, secular business, in it completely. And then the family, they've so drastically changed the nature of the family by their initiatives, and of course the church, where we're even seeing whole denominations embracing homosexuality. And so let me just say that I am not against homosexual, because they too are sinners just like you and me. But whenever we try to call something that is sin not sin, that's where we get into the problem. And so we're just trying to be truthful about what's taking place and how this fractures a society. So Thunder Road Strategy is an initiative that was created to counter the conservative voice in America. It's designed to kick God out of our culture. Over $18 billion raised for this, and George Soros is one of the key givers to that initiative. And we're fighting a major battle over the heart of a nation. So let's talk about 10 success strategies that we can employ to begin this process of reclaiming some of the spiritual foundations of our nation. The first thing we need to understand is that we need a DNA of culture influence that's made up of prayer, equipping marketplace leaders in the 7 mountains, solving problems in culture so we have greater influence, just as Jesus did. And then we need to employ the 7 mountain strategy that's a powerful strategy to shift the nation, and using networks and collaboration. The first thing we need to realize is that we each need a personal transformation throughout the nation. That's revival. Romans 12:2 says, "Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." We need to engage the culture through dialogue. We need to have conversations with people who differ from us. You see, to influence culture, we must understand the viewpoints of those we see things differently than us. Jesus calls us to love our enemies, not necessarily agree with them. Jesus did not agree with the tax collector's business practices. So let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer with each one. Colossians 4:6. Number 3 is we need a biblical theology of work taught in our churches. This is one of the big failures in the churches today, not equipping those who reside in the 7 cultural mountains to see their work as a calling and a ministry. Number 4 is we need to educate the next generation into 7M careers. Many simply don't understand work as a calling. And then number 5 is that we need to serve the community by solving problems through the church in the city. Just imagine what would happen if you asked your mayor, how can we serve the city today? What problems do you have that we can come together and begin solving those problems? The more problems you solve, the more influence you have in a culture. Number 6 is develop key influencer strategies by mountain. Here we have arts and entertainment, business, church, education, family, media, and the government. And we need a strategy for influencing these 7 cultural mountains. And that's the initiative that I am telling you about today, that we're starting immediately in forming what I call Culture Shaper Alliance groups by each mountain. And we've already identified many of the leaders that are going to serve on each of these leadership teams within the 7 cultural mountains. And we will be employing these soon and engaging leaders all over the nation and literally all over the world through this initiative. Be a part of a network. BeCommissioned.com is one of the apps that will be used for the implementation of this strategy. And this is a fantastic app that will identify those that want to be a part of a particular mountain, how to connect with others, and how to network and even fund some of the initiatives. And then we need to support organizations and initiatives who are making a difference. You see, philanthropy needs to change. Philanthropy needs to identify those organizations that are on the front lines that can shift this culture. We're in a dramatic season of where we are today. Things that you would normally give need to be focused on things that are shifting culture, not just, making wells in India. Those are important for sure. But if we're going to save our nation, which is going to continue to be the number one giving nation in the world, then we've got to save our nation. And we've got to have conferences and training to cast the vision, to help people understand their role in these assignments. And of course, we need to move in a new dimension with God. 2 Chronicles 7:14 tells us, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin and heal their land. And in Jeremiah 18:7 and 8 it says, if any time I announce that a nation or kingdom is to be rooted, torn down, and destroyed, and if that nation I warn repents of its evil, then I will relent and not inflict on it the disaster I had planned. These are the promises that we can stand on. And so it's never been done before like this, where we really believe what the Word says. We develop a strategy around the 7 mountains, and we believe that America is going to be an exception to this rule because there's a remnant in America that still believes God, that still trusts God, that still obeys God. And we want to be the nation that avoids the imminent collapse and a nation restored and extended to fulfill its full purpose on the earth. And right now, we have Phase 1 deliverables of identifying 50,000 churches to be on board and implementing 500 million people praying. We are well on the way toward that. And a 7-mountain strategy, and then 50 major national ministries, soon to add 500 other ministries working together in all the 7 mountains to create a spark like in movements in 25 countries, tens of millions of souls saved in the next 5 years. This is our vision. And to date, we've already got a good start on a number of initiatives. The Isaac Newton Project, which brought together many, many ministries from around the country and the world to contribute things that to the body of Christ free of charge. The Isaac Newton Project is an exciting project that's online now. The Church Mountain has been launched. We've identified many of the church leaders who have said yes to this initiative, who want to be involved and want to see our culture restored. Then reconciliation leaders are recruited. We know that we have a reconciliation issue in America of racism and other issues that need to be addressed specifically. Efforts are on the way. The 7 mountain leaders and influencers have been recruited, and they're now being put in place and engaged. And then we have the Education Mountain that's already begun with Christian College Alliance Project in progress. And so we're excited about this new initiative. As I mentioned, the Commission app will be very helpful for us with the Clapham Group model of adding technology to what William Wilberforce did years ago, where he had 18 individuals that created 69 world-changing initiatives. And as a result, they abolished slavery and accomplished many other things. Today we have technology that will allow us to leverage those relationships and be more effective in impacting culture. And so we encourage you to sign up for the Co-Mission app and be a part of this movement. and be counted and be a part of one of the groups. You know, over the last 24 years, I've been equipping leaders since 1996, and I've been in 26 countries equipping leaders and written 20 books on the topics of faith, work, and culture. And I've hosted international 7 mountain conferences and workshops all over the world. And then last year in 2019, I hosted the International Culture Shapers Summit. We brought 350 leaders of leaders together for the purpose of developing a strategic alliance to impact the culture. We're entering a new season now. It's the most important season of all. And, we've been launching our Change Agent Master Mentor program to engage those leaders out there to help them become change agents in the culture. If you're not part of that, I encourage you to belong to that at camastermentor.com. And you can take a free course there. And of course, my 2 main books that talk about culture are Change Agent, Engaging Your Passion to Be the One Who Makes a Difference. There's a chapter in each of those that tells us about each of the cultural mountains, how we lost it, what do we do to regain it, and what would it look like if we're successful. And of course, the Joseph calling. There are many Josephs in the world today, and those Josephs are being set in motion to be influencers at the top of their governmental mountain. And so this book helps people understand what does it mean to have a Joseph calling on your life. So in this new season, here's what we're going to do. I'll serve this 7 strategic initiative executive committee along with 3 others. We'll have an executive team leading this initiative. We'll travel throughout the nation sharing the vision and help coordinate the 7 mountain leadership committees. We'll help oversee national events to share this vision. We'll continue growing our Change Agent Master Mentor program for leaders, and we'll continue to expand readership of TGIF around the world in 105 countries. We know that TGIF is a key tool to help men and women live out their faith in the area of their calling, their work life. I want to share with you that I have a fantastic board that's along this journey with me. Stephen Wright, Ford Taylor, Dennis Kelly, Steve Hyland, and James Kramer. I appreciate each of them, and I just want you to know that we have a team that's accountable and is working together to see this come to fruition. The Spiritual War for America, a catalytic strategy for national revival. Will you partner with us in this critical time in our nation? You know, our funding goal is to raise $250,000 in 2020 to offset some of the loss of income we've had from the lack of speaking income and training because of this COVID-19 crisis. And so we've had a downturn in our income, and now we have a new initiative that we want to invest in, but we need your partnership. So if you would consider being a partner with us, please consider a donation or even a monthly donation by going to todaygodisfirst.com and just click on donate, and you can also send in donations to Marketplace Leaders at 3520 Habersham Club Drive, Cumming, Georgia 30041. And feel free to contact me at the number below at 404-964-2777 or email me at os@marketplaceleaders.org. Again, if you want to donate to what we're doing, go to todaygodisfirst.com and click on the donate button. If you'd like to share this presentation with someone, we encourage you to send them to this website, 7mrevival.com. That's 7mrevival.com. God bless.